The Cardassians never again underestimated the savagery and unpredictability of humans in battle, after the slaughter of General Dukat's elite shock troopers by Lewis Taylor's outnumbered and outgunned colonial militia. In the dimly lit classroom, elderly historian Corvus traced a claw along his leathery gray skin, remembering how the blood of Cardassia's mightiest warriors had splattered across alien soil on that fateful day centuries ago. "You are here to learn the most important lesson in Cardassian history," Corvus growled, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the assembled Cardassian youth. "The day we encountered humans was the day the course of our civilization changed forever." Corvus recalled how the Cardassians had conquered dozens of worlds with ease, enslaving species after species to build a glorious star-spanning empire. With the most fearsome armada in the galaxy and technology millennia ahead of their rivals, the Cardassians saw themselves as the rightful rulers of all intelligent life. That was before their ruinous first contact with humanity. General Dukat was our most brilliant tactician, and he saw the remote human colony as easy prey to subjugate and make an example of, Corvus explained to the captivated students. But Dukat made one critical mistake. He assumed the human settlers would cower before our superior numbers and firepower. He underestimated their leader, Lewis Taylor. The old Cardassian involuntarily shuddered at the mere mention of that name. Lewis Taylor, the indomitable one-eyed human warrior with a gruesome scar bisecting his face. The man who had handed the Cardassians their most humiliating defeat and forever shattered the myth of their invincibility. "You'll soon understand the grave error of our hubris," Corvus said gravely, the haunting memories of human ferocity and tenacity etched into his mind. And why to this day, centuries later, Cardassians still never dare fight the humans if we can possibly avoid it. Corvus describes in grim detail the nightmarish carnage unleashed by the human defenders upon the Cardassian invaders. The humans wore advanced exoskeleton suits that shrugged off Cardassian plasma fire like a light rain, while augmenting the wearer's strength and speed to superhuman levels. Massive Gauss rifles, far more powerful than the Cardassian infantry weapons, spat hypersonic metal slugs that tore through armor, flesh, and bone with equal ease. The Cardassians had initially swarmed the colony with superior numbers, but their technological edge was insurmountable. No matter how many Cardassian soldiers poured from the dropships, they were cut down in droves by the human defenders' precise, withering fire and close combat prowess. Elite Cardassian shock troopers, the pride of the Empire, proved laughably outmatched by even a single human in an exoskeleton. Leading the slaughter was Lewis Taylor himself, Corvus growls, his eyes distant as if picturing the one-eyed warrior. His blood-red armor was the last sight for hundreds of Cardassians that day. The hypersonic rounds from his shoulder-mounted railgun punched holes through our soldiers' torsos and heads from over a kilometer away. In close combat, he crushed Cardassian skulls with his bare hands and smashed entire squads into bloody smears with his suit's piston-driven fists and feet. The Cardassians fell back in a fighting retreat to their landing zones. Corvus recounts how for every human defender that fell, 50 Cardassians died, a kill ratio that still astounds and horrifies him to this day. In orbit, Dukat watched the massacre unfold with mounting panic and rage. In desperation, he ordered his warships to rain orbital fire on the colony to crush the human resistance at any cost. But, as the Cardassian ships powered up their weapons, the human colonists revealed one last nasty surprise. Anti-ship missiles erupted from hidden underground silos. The missiles' powerful plasma warheads and AI guidance systems made a mockery of the Cardassian vessels' defenses. Dukat's grand battleships exploded into flames one after another, the debris crashing to the planet's surface like fiery meteors. I still remember the anguished screams when the surviving Cardassian troops saw their fleet, and any hope of escape or victory immolated before their eyes. Corvus rasps. They knew then that they were doomed. Stranded on an alien world, surrounded by an enemy they couldn't even begin to comprehend, much less defeat. Corvus fixes his students with a haunted gaze as he continues the tale of the Cardassians' disastrous first encounter with humanity. The ground battle still raged around the humans' colony, but it was no longer a fight. just a merciless extermination of the Cardassian survivors. The human soldiers in their invincible exoskeletons moved from building to building, from street to street, gunning down and pulverizing the invaders with mechanical efficiency. Lewis Taylor didn't just repel the Cardassian attack that day, Corvus says. He broke the Cardassian military. He shattered our confidence and our aura of invincibility. The human broadcast footage of their victory across the galaxy, sending an unmistakable message. They were the most ruthless killers in the universe, and not to be trifled with under any circumstances. The acrid stench of burnt metal and charred flesh hung heavy in the air as Corvus shifted his narration to the battle's grim aftermath. Across the ruined colony, Cardassian soldiers emerged from the rubble, their weapons empty and their spirits crushed. They shuffled forward in ragged lines, heads bowed in defeat, to surrender to the victorious human defenders. Lewis Taylor himself strode out to meet them, his red and black exoskeleton suit battered and stained with Cardassian blood, but still standing strong. The one-eyed warrior fixed the broken invaders with his piercing blue gaze, a mix of grim satisfaction and bone-deep weariness etched on his scarred face. He solemnly accepted their surrender, instructing his men to round up the Cardassians and take them into custody. As the dejected aliens were marched away under armed guard, Corvus noted that Taylor and the human soldiers wasted no time in securing their victory. Teams fanned out to assess the colony's damage, triaging the wounded, and beginning the lengthy process of rebuilding. The historian revealed to his astonished students that, incredibly, human casualties were minimal, a testament to the resilience of their exoskeleton armor and advanced medical technology. In contrast, Cardassian losses defied comprehension. Corvus grimly recounted the numbers. Over 80% of the invasion force dead or captured. The entire proud fleet reduced to shattered wreckage drifting in orbit. An empire that just hours before thought itself invincible laid low by a single human colony. News of the catastrophic defeat spread through Cardassian space like a virus, Corvus explained, plunging the population into numb shock and disbelief. The usually iron-fisted grasp of the government temporarily loosened as the horrifying scope of the disaster exceeded the High Command's ability to censor it. Frantic meetings were held as panicked Cardassian leaders desperately reassessed their priorities in the face of humanity's awesome military might. Shaken to their core, they came to the grim realization that a species they had arrogantly dismissed as primitive had just handed them the worst defeat in their history without breaking a sweat. The consequences were immediate and far-reaching, Corvus said. Cardassian forces began a frantic pullback from dozens of conquered worlds, knowing their suddenly diminished military was hopelessly overstretched. Facing human intervention, the Cardassians cut their losses and abandoned their hard-won empire to rebellion and ruin. Bled dry by the cost of the disastrous war and sapped of confidence, the once indomitable Cardassians found themselves in swift decline. The economy crumbled. Faith in the government and military evaporated, and the unquestioned galactic supremacy they had taken for granted vanished overnight. Never again did Cardassia seek battle with humanity, Corvus said, his voice grave. The price was too high, the lesson too harsh. Our leaders began the war believing humans to be just another inferior species to be conquered. They ended it knowing humanity to be the most terrifyingly powerful force in the galaxy. The months after the disastrous invasion saw the once mighty Cardassian Empire scrambling to salvage its rapidly crumbling hold on power, Corvus explained to his rapt audience. Shipyards and factories across Cardassian space strained to churn out replacement warships and weapons to replenish the staggering losses inflicted by the humans. Vast sums were poured into rebuilding the shattered military, even as funding for civilian infrastructure and services withered. But the humans, their eyes now open to the Cardassian threat, refused to sit idle. Lewis Taylor, the grizzled one-eyed warrior who had handed the Cardassians their catastrophic defeat, became a living legend among humanity. His name alone struck terror into the hearts of Cardassian grunts and generals alike. Taylor didn't rest on his laurels after the victory, Corvus said, a mix of grudging respect and old fear in his voice. He knew the Cardassians would be back, seeking vengeance, so he took the fight to them. With a fleet of fast attack ships and elite exoskeleton-clad Marines, Taylor led a relentless campaign of lightning raids into Cardassian territory. His forces, armed with the same advanced weapons and armor that had annihilated the invasion force, struck supply depots, shipyards, and command centers with impunity. Corvus's claws tapped a nervous staccato rhythm as he relived those dark days. Our best defenses, our most secret bases, none of it mattered. Taylor's ships could slip past any sensor screen. His weapons sliced through any shield. In a matter of weeks, he crippled our ability to rebuild and rearm. Cardassian morale, already in tatters, plummeted to new depths with every human attack. The aura of invincibility that once surrounded the Cardassian military had been ripped away, replaced by a grim sense of dread and inevitability. Recruitment rates cratered as Cardassians across the Empire balked at the prospect of facing Taylor's dreaded forces. The situation grew even more dire as the humans began forging alliances with species the Cardassians had long oppressed. The Bajorans, the Ferengi, and a host of other client races, sensing weakness, rose up in open revolt. With Cardassian forces stretched thin and crumbling, the emboldened rebels seized their chance. They flocked to the human banner, Corvus said, eager for vengeance, hungry for their share of the spoils. Human technology and support made their fleets and armies a genuine threat almost overnight. Beset on all sides, their reserves of ships and soldiers exhausted, their economy in shambles, the Cardassian leadership fell into a pit of despairing paranoia. Privately, they knew the war was lost, but admitting defeat to the humans and their allies was a humiliation too painful to contemplate. In a final, desperate gambit, the Cardassian High Command gave the order Corvus still considers unforgivable. Deploy bioweapons en masse against the human colonies. Genetically engineered viruses, each tailored to human physiology, were loaded into cloaked missiles and launched at a dozen worlds. For a few fleeting days, it seemed the Cardassians' horrific decision would turn the tide. Reports trickled in of human settlements writhing with disease, their hospitals overwhelmed. But once again, the Cardassians underestimated their enemy. With astonishing speed, human scientists analyzed the virus strains and developed effective treatments and vaccines. The same advanced biotech used to augment their soldiers was now turned to protecting their civilians. Within a week, the bioweapon plague had been contained, but the damage to what remained of Cardassia's reputation was irreparable. The galactic community reacted with universal revulsion at the Cardassians' shameful tactics. What few neutral parties remained abandoned them in disgust. Only then, with our empire crumbling to ash around us, did we finally admit the truth, Corvus said heavily. The war was over. We had lost. Continuing to fight would only lead to our obliteration. Stripped of allies, resources, and all hope of victory, the Cardassian Union at last sued for peace, knowing they would be negotiating from a position of utter defeat and desperation. The humans and their allies had won total victory. The fate of Cardassia now lay in their hands. Corvus's tone grew somber as he shifted his narration to the fateful peace summit on Khitomer. The Cardassians, their once mighty empire teetering on the brink of total collapse, sent a delegation led by Garrick, a newly appointed diplomat. Garrick and his team arrived on the neutral planet, their faces strained and spirits crushed, knowing they would have no choice but to accept humanity's terms, no matter how harsh. In stark contrast, Louis Taylor strode into the negotiation chambers with an air of steely confidence. The one-eyed warrior, still clad in his iconic red and black armor, had been appointed humanity's lead negotiator. He knew the Cardassians had been beaten and would have to yield to his demands. But Taylor also understood that a stable, enduring peace required more than just grinding a foe's face in the dirt. For weeks, the two sides haggled and debated, Garrick trying to salvage some scraps of dignity for his broken people, Corvus said, his clawed fingers steepled. The Cardassians pleaded to keep some conquered worlds, to maintain a military presence in key systems, desperate to cling to some vestige of their former power. Taylor was unmoved by their appeals. He bluntly demanded total Cardassian withdrawal from all occupied territories and a complete dismantling of their war machine. The humans' cold blue gaze made it clear these terms were non-negotiable. In the end, the Cardassians had no choice but to submit to Taylor's stipulations in full, Corvus said heavily. It was that, or consign themselves to utter annihilation at humanity's hands. The resulting treaty, forever after known as the Khitomer Accords, was a humiliating capitulation for Cardassia. Corvus enumerated the crushing terms: massive reparations paid to conquered worlds and families of the slain, human observers permanently stationed on Cardassia to enforce compliance, mandatory constant inspections of all Cardassian military facilities. The proud Cardassian Union had been reduced to a mere vassal of humanity, Corvus said, his voice tinged with old bitterness. A toothless shell of an empire, forever diminished, forever subservient to human whims. The old historian's eyes drifted to a display showing the current Cardassian flag, the traditional crest of the Cardassian Union, now flanked and overshadowed by the twin symbols of Earth and the greater human alliance. A constant reminder of Cardassia's fall from grace and the price they paid for daring to challenge humanity's might. Corvus leaned back in his chair, his yellow eyes glinting in the dim light as he delved into the tumultuous aftermath of the Khitomer Accords. The treaty may have ended the war, but it was far from a panacea, he rasped, his students hanging on his every word. For the Cardassians, it was a bitter pill to swallow, a humiliating capitulation that stripped away their pride and power. The old historian's claws tapped a staccato rhythm on the desk as he recounted how the humans, ever magnanimous in victory, had poured resources into rebuilding the shattered worlds left in the war's wake. Louis Taylor himself oversaw many of these efforts, Corvus revealed. The same indomitable warrior who had broken the Cardassian military now turned his formidable will towards forging a lasting peace. Corvus described how Taylor, resplendent in the dress uniform of the Human Alliance, stood side by side with the leaders of Bajor, Ferenginar, and other liberated worlds, cutting the red tape on new hospitals, schools, and infrastructure projects. The one-eyed human's face, once a terrifying visage to Cardassians, now graced murals and monuments on a dozen planets as a symbol of strength and unity. But not all Cardassians accepted this new galactic order, Corvus said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial growl. Some saw the Khitomer Accords not as a peace treaty, but as a mark of shame to be erased at any cost. The historian's gaze drifted to an old news video playing on the screen behind him, showing a Cardassian male with piercing blue eyes and a haughty sneer. Dukat! Corvus spat the name like a curse. A general in the war, a master manipulator, and now the self-proclaimed leader of a terrorist group known as the True Way. Corvus detailed how Dukat, evading capture after the Cardassian surrender, had slipped away into the shadows, biding his time and gathering followers from the disaffected remnants of the once mighty Cardassian military. Dukat sold them a seductive lie, Corvus said. A promise that the True Way would overthrow the Khitomer Accords, drive out the Human Alliance, and restore the Cardassian Empire to its former glory. The students murmured in surprise as Corvus described the True Way's campaign of terror that followed. Hospitals and schools bombed, diplomats and politicians assassinated, food and water supplies on entire planets poisoned. The historian's voice dripped with disdain as he recounted how Dukat, still hiding like a rat in the shadows, claimed credit for each atrocity, trying to goad the Human Alliance into a rash counterattack. But humanity refused to play Dukat's game, Corvus said, a grudging respect in his tone. Rather than lashing out, the humans and their allies played a patient game, using their vast intelligence network and advanced surveillance technology to methodically track down and apprehend True Way operatives one by one. Corvus brought up hollow images of elite human soldiers in sleek black exosuits, working side by side with Bajoran, Ferengi, and other allied forces to raid True Way hideouts and arms caches. The technology gap that had doomed the Cardassians in the war now worked against them, as Ducat's followers found their every move anticipated, their every secret base exposed. But Ducat himself remained elusive, Corvus said, always one step ahead, always ready with another atrocity to keep the galaxy off balance. Lewis Taylor, the humans, their allies, they all knew there could be no true peace until Ducat was brought to justice. And so the hunt continued, a shadow war raging across the stars, the fate of the fragile new galactic order hanging in the balance. Corvus trailed off, letting the weight of his words sink in. The students sat in rapt attention, their eyes wide, the gravity of this hidden history hitting home. The grizzled historian smiled inwardly, knowing his tale was far from over. The chase for Ducat, the battle for the galaxy's future, was only just beginning. Corvus's voice grew quiet as he delved into the tense underground confrontation between Lewis Taylor and the rebel Cardassian leader Ducat. The air in the cavern was thick with barely restrained hostility, the acrid stench of plasma rifles primed to fire at the slightest provocation. Taylor and his hand-picked team of elite operatives stood across from Ducat and his fanatical True Way followers, the two groups sizing each other up like snarling predators. The human soldiers were clad in their signature black exosuits, faces obscured behind polarized visors. Ducat's men wore an eclectic mix of scavenged Cardassian combat armor and civilian garb, their eyes glinting with revolutionary fervor. "I didn't come here to trade pleasantries, Ducat," Taylor growled, his voice cold and hard as the barrel of a gun. "You have a weapon of mass destruction, and I'm here to ensure you never use it." Ducat laughed, a harsh bark devoid of humor. "Always so blunt and arrogant, aren't you, Taylor? Just like when you led the butchering of my people." "The Cardassians butchered themselves with their own belligerence," Taylor retorted. "The Khitomer Accords were a mercy compared to what we could have done." "The Accords are a chain around Cardassia's neck," Ducat snarled. "One I intend to break, along with the human alliance's grip on the galaxy." The rogue leader gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward hefting a heavy black case. With theatrical relish, Ducat flipped open the latches to reveal a spherical device nestled in protective foam. It was small, no larger than a grapefruit, but Corvus knew it contained the destructive power to rend planets. "Behold the red matter bomb," Ducat proclaimed. "The great equalizer. With this, I can reduce your vaunted alliance to ashes, starting with the Zephyr colony and its 10 million souls." Taylor's fingers twitched reflexively towards his holstered disruptor pistol. "If you even think of unleashing that on civilians, there won't be a hole deep enough in the universe for you to hide in." "Peace, Taylor." Ducat raised a placating hand, a smug smile on his lips. "I am not an unreasonable man. I have no desire to consign helpless civilians to oblivion. I simply want to open negotiations for a new galactic order, one that restores Cardassia to its rightful place of strength and pride." "You mean an order built on terror and the threat of planetary genocide," Taylor spat. "I won't let you plunge the galaxy back into tyranny and bloodshed." "My dear Taylor, you misunderstand," Ducat said smoothly. "I'm offering you a choice. Agree to my terms, the disbanding of the human alliance, the repeal of the Khitomer Accords, the restoration of conquered territories to Cardassian rule. In return, I give you the red matter bomb and we usher in a new age of peace and prosperity." "And the alternative?" Taylor asked, his tone loaded with menace. Ducat's face hardened. "Zephyr dies screaming. Billions more will follow, and the galaxy will drown in blood and fire until humanity is broken and begging for mercy at the feet of Cardassia reborn." Taylor went silent, his jaw clenched tight. Corvus could almost hear the gears turning in the human warrior's head as he weighed his options. The entire cavern seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. Corvus let the scene hang in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade. The students leaned forward in their seats, enraptured and anxious to know what would happen next. But the old historian simply smiled enigmatically, knowing that the true twist in this pivotal moment was yet to come. Corvus's voice lowered to a tense growl as he described the standoff between Lewis Taylor and Ducat in the shadowy cavern. The two bitter enemies, surrounded by their armed followers, glared at each other across a gulf of hatred and history. Ducat, his eyes glinting with fanatic light, demanded that Taylor agree to a new treaty, one that would grant the Cardassians the power to rearm and reclaim their lost glory. The Khitomer Accords were a mistake, a moment of weakness, Ducat snarled. Cardassia deserves to be strong again. You will give us that, Taylor, or this world and billions of others will burn. But Taylor stood firm, his battle-scarred face like granite. The only mistake here is you thinking I'd ever negotiate with a terrorist, he said coldly. Surrender, Ducat. Hand over the red matter bomb. It's over. Ducat's face twisted with rage at Taylor's defiance. So be it, he hissed. Kill them all. At his command, the Cardassian rebels opened fire, filling the air with deadly plasma bolts. Taylor and his team reacted instantly, their own weapons blazing to life. Corvus described the fierce close-quarters battle that followed, a deadly dance of flashing disruptor beams and whirring servos as the humans in their exosuits clashed with the fanatical Cardassians. Despite their skill and advanced tech, the humans found themselves heavily outnumbered. For every Cardassian that fell, two more seemed to take their place, Corvus recounted grimly. Taylor's team was being pushed back, cornered. It seemed Ducat's gambit would succeed. Just as all hope seemed lost, a new sound echoed through the cavern, the battle cries of charging Bajoran resistance fighters. Like vengeful ghosts, they emerged from hidden tunnels and shadowed alcoves, Corvus described, ambushing the Cardassians from behind with righteous fury. Long victims of Cardassian oppression, the Bajorans seized their chance for payback. Corvus painted a vivid picture of the underground war that ensued, Bajoran partisans and human super soldiers fighting side by side against the hated Cardassians. Disruptor fire and explosions ripped through the cavern as the tide of battle turned. Seeing his forces crumbling, Ducat made a desperate grab for the red matter bomb, intending to flee. But Taylor, spotting the move, lunged after him. The two leaders crashed together like battling giants, Corvus described, trading titanic blows amidst the chaos. Ducat, spitting curses, tried to bring the bomb to bear. In a last suicidal gambit, his finger stabbed down on the activation key, intending to consume Taylor, himself, and the entire cavern in a black hole's maw. But with speed even his exosuit could barely match, Taylor wrenched the bomb from Ducat's grasp and deactivated it in one fluid motion. A nanosecond later, the human's armored fist crashed into Ducat's jaw in a punch that could shatter tank armor. The Cardassian crumpled like a rag doll. Just like that, it was over, Corvus said solemnly. The battle, the threat, a dark chapter in galactic history. Ducat's mad crusade ended with his broken body at Taylor's feet and the Bajoran sun rising over a galaxy made safer by human courage. Corvus's voice grew heavy with the weight of history as he recounted the aftermath of that fateful battle in the caverns. With Ducat's defeat, it seemed the tide had finally turned, he said. But the scars of the conflict would linger for generations. The historian described how Taylor and his battered team emerged from the underground depths into the blinding light of day, the red matter bomb securely in their possession. Waiting to greet them was a sea of cheering Bajorans and allied forces, their faces etched with relief and joy at the news of the True Way's downfall. Taylor, ever the soldier, wasted no time on celebration, Corvus noted. There was still work to be done. The one-eyed warrior credited the victory to the courage of his team and the invaluable aid of the Bajoran resistance. But even as he spoke, his mind was already turning to the next phase of the struggle. In the days that followed, the Human Alliance and their Bajoran allies launched a relentless hunt for the scattered remnants of Ducat's followers. Corvus painted a vivid picture of joint strike teams kicking down doors in the dark of night, rooting out True Way operatives from their bolt holes and safe houses. Many of the Cardassian rebels, their faith in Ducat's mad cause shattered, laid down their arms and surrendered to face justice, the historian said. But others clung to their delusions of lost glory, fleeing to the shadows to lick their wounds and dream of vengeance. Corvus shifted his focus to the galactic stage, where the human and Bajoran leadership, determined to forge a lasting peace from the ashes of war, proposed a series of landmark reforms to the Khitomer Accords. These Bajoran amendments, as they came to be known, sought to balance Cardassian autonomy with galactic security, he explained. The amendments promised the Cardassian people greater self-governance, but also imposed strict limits on their military power to prevent a resurgence of aggressive expansionism. The centerpiece of the reforms was the creation of a multi-species peacekeeping task force made up of human, Bajoran, and even Cardassian personnel to guard against future threats to stability. The response from Cardassia was mixed, Corvus admitted. Some still saw any compromise as a humiliation, a final twist of the knife in the dying body of their once mighty empire. But most, weary of conflict and ruin, recognized the necessity of change to building a better future. The historian let his words hang in the air, a sense of gravity settling over the classroom. The battle against the true way had been won, but the struggle for a just and enduring peace was only beginning. And the decisions made in the aftermath of that underground confrontation would shape the galaxy for generations to come. Corvus leaned back in his chair, his yellow eyes distant as he recounted the years of tenuous peace that followed the signing of the Bajoran Amendments. The birth of the United Federation of Planets from the ashes of war was a turning point in galactic history, he rasped to his attentive students. A new order founded on the principles of cooperation and mutual understanding. The old historian spoke of how Lewis Taylor, the indomitable warrior who had once broken the Cardassian Empire, now worked tirelessly as a diplomat to forge bonds between former enemies. With the patience of a Vulcan monk and the tenacity of a Klingon warrior, Taylor traversed the stars, brokering treaties and settling disputes, Corvus said, a living symbol of the Federation's commitment to harmony. As an example of this new spirit of collaboration, Corvus pointed to the joint Cardassian Federation research station established on the remote world of Sukara. A shining beacon of progress perched atop Sukara's rare mineral deposits and geological wonders, he described. Staffed by a diverse mix of Federation, Cardassian, and Bajoran scientists, all working together in common purpose. But even as he praised the station's lofty goals, Corvus acknowledged the undercurrents of tension that swirled around the project from its inception. Many Cardassians, their pride still stinging from defeat, viewed the Federation's involvement as a thinly veiled resource grab, he admitted, a chance for the humans to plunder Cardassian riches under the guise of scientific cooperation. Corvus noted the reservations from the Bajoran contingent as well. After decades of brutal occupation, some Bajorans questioned the wisdom of placing a station so far from watchful eyes, he said gravely. An isolated outpost, ripe for the machinations of Cardassian hardliners still hungry for the glory days of empire. The historian's clawed fingers tapped a staccato rhythm as he described how, despite these misgivings, the Sukaran station took shape on schedule. Sleek labs and powerful sensors rose from the planet's rugged surface, tended by a small but dedicated staff. For a time, it seemed the doubters had been proven wrong, Corvus allowed. He spoke of productive experiments and groundbreaking papers, of Federation, Cardassian, and Bajoran scientists breaking bread together in the spirit of friendship. But even as he recounted these halcyon days, Corvus's gravelly tones hinted at the darkness lurking beneath the surface. Sideways glances in the corridors, whispered arguments in the labs, a slow poison of resentment and mistrust. The scars of the past ran deep, Corvus intoned, his gaze sweeping over his rapt audience, and nowhere were they rawer than between the Cardassian and Bajoran personnel. A history of oppression and atrocity that could not be easily forgotten or forgiven. The old Cardassian let his words hang in the air, a palpable sense of foreboding settling over the classroom. For all the promise of peace and progress, it seemed the shadows of ancient conflicts still haunted the halls of the Sukaran station. The question remained, would the light of cooperation prove strong enough to banish them? Or would the research outpost, like so many noble dreams before it, eventually succumb to the weight of old hatreds. Corvus's eyes glinted with the knowledge of one who had seen the cycle of hope and despair play out countless times across the galaxy's sprawling history. The answers, he knew, would not be simple or easy, but they would be written in the choices and actions of those now walking the path of peace, one tentative step at a time. Corvus's gravelly voice took on a grim tone as he delved into the fateful incident that shook the Sukara research station to its core. Just 6 months after the joint Cardassian Federation Bajoran facility began its work, a shocking discovery in the planet's depths would ignite a firestorm of controversy and danger. At the heart of the tale was Dr. Kovat, a brilliant but volatile Cardassian geologist whose hunger for glory often outweighed his regard for protocol. Corvus recounted how Kovat, leading a team deep into Sukara's labyrinthine cave system, stumbled upon a previously unknown chamber glittering with strange, energy-suffused crystals. Kovat's eyes lit up with the fevered gleam of blind ambition, Corvus rasped. He saw in those pulsing crystals a chance to cement his scientific legacy, to bring glory to Cardassia. All thoughts of caution were swiftly cast aside. Disregarding the station's strict protocols for handling unknown substances, Kovat hastily collected samples and ferried them back to his lab for study. When his actions came to light, the reaction from the Bajoran contingent was swift and furious. The Bajorans had not forgotten the cruelties inflicted upon them by Cardassian hands, Corvus explained. To them, Kovat's reckless disregard for safety was a bitter echo of that oppression, putting Bajoran lives at risk for Cardassian gain. The Bajoran scientists, led by the fiery Dr. Latha Mabrin, stormed into Kovat's lab, demanding the crystals be quarantined and destroyed at once. Kovat and his Cardassian colleagues bristled at the intrusion, insisting the discovery was too valuable to discard. As tempers flared and accusations flew, Captain Rachel Garrett, the station's human commander, found herself thrust into the role of peacemaker. Corvus spoke of how Garrett, known for her diplomatic finesse, sought to quell the rising tensions with a carefully crafted compromise. She proposed the crystals be rigorously studied, but under the strictest containment protocols, Corvus detailed. All findings would be shared openly among the three governments, ensuring no one faction could monopolize any potential benefits. But even as Kovat grudgingly agreed and Mabrin simmered with reluctant assent, the crystalline threat was already growing. Corvus's voice dropped to a foreboding whisper as he described the catastrophe that followed. The energy within those crystals had been building, destabilizing, he intoned. And in Kovat's unsecured lab, it finally reached a critical point. In a blinding flash, the crystals detonated, a massive burst of exotic energies ripping through the station's hull. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, bulkheads crumpled like tin, and the tortured screams of the dying echoed through smoke-choked corridors. When the chaos settled, the full scope of the tragedy became clear, Corvus said heavily. Several scientists, Cardassian and Bajoran alike, lay dead. The station itself, a once gleaming beacon of cooperation, now drifted broken and powerless in the void. As emergency lights flickered and alarms wailed, the survivors could only look upon the devastation with horror, knowing that the fragile trust between their peoples had been shattered in the space of a single, calamitous instant. As the USS Excalibur sped away from the crippled Sukara station, the surviving scientists huddled in shocked silence in the ship's crowded sickbay. The once pristine white walls were now smeared with soot and blood, the air thick with the moans of the wounded and the acrid stench of burnt flesh. Corvus's eyes lingered on the broken form of Dr. Kovat, the Cardassian scientist who had unwittingly unleashed the catastrophe. The man lay on a biobed, his gray skin ashen and his breathing labored, as a team of Starfleet doctors worked frantically to stabilize him. Kovat's recklessness had cost lives and thrown the fragile peace into turmoil, Corvus said gravely. But even as he hovered on the brink of death, the true architects of the disaster were yet to be unmasked. The old historian's gaze shifted to the imposing figure of Commander Jack Bauer as he strode into the sickbay, his hawkish features set in a determined scowl. The seasoned Starfleet intelligence operative wasted no time in launching his investigation, his eyes scanning the room like a predator seeking prey. Bauer and his team pored over every scrap of data from the ruined station, Corvus recounted. They analyzed sensor logs, combed through wreckage, and interrogated the shell-shocked survivors, searching for any clue to the cause of the explosion. It was not long before a grim picture began to emerge. The crystalline substance that had detonated with such devastating force was not, as initially believed, a natural phenomenon. It was, in fact, a highly advanced and dangerously unstable form of energy storage technology far beyond the scientific capabilities of any known species. The implications were chilling, Corvus said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. This was no accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage. Someone had planted the volatile crystals in the caves of Sukhara, knowing the scientists would find them and bring them to the station. It was a trap, masterfully baited and sprung. As Bauer's team dug deeper, the political fallout from the disaster began to mount. The Cardassian government, enraged by the loss of life and the damage to their scientific prestige, accused the Bajorans of orchestrating the sabotage as an act of revenge for the occupation. The Bajorans, in turn, pointed the finger at rogue Cardassian elements, claiming they sought to undermine the peace for their own gain. The once unified Federation found itself caught in the middle, struggling to keep the tense alliance from unraveling completely, Corvus said. He described how Captain Garrett and Lewis Taylor worked tirelessly to soothe tempers and find common ground between the two embittered sides. They shuttled from meeting to meeting, from Cardassia to Bajor, trading proposals and concessions, desperate to stave off a renewed outbreak of violence. But even as the diplomats fought for peace, Bauer's investigation uncovered a chilling new dimension to the crisis. Buried in the data recovered from the station's shattered computers was evidence of a clandestine transmission sent in the moments before the explosion. The signal, heavily encrypted and expertly masked, had been beamed to a distant, uninhabited sector of space. It was a message, Corvus intoned, a single word that echoed from the past like a curse. Revok. The name sent a visible shudder through the classroom. Revok, the infamous Cardassian warlord, the butcher of Bajor, the mastermind behind a string of unspeakable war crimes. Long thought dead, he had been a ghost story, a monster used to frighten children. But now, it seemed, he had returned. As Bauer and his team raced to unravel the mystery, to unmask Revok and thwart his plans, a sense of dread settled over the quadrant, Corvus said, his voice heavy with foreboding. For if the Cardassian devil had indeed risen from the grave, if he had set his sights on the Federation, then the explosion on Sukhara would be only the first shot in a war that could consume the stars themselves. Corvus's piercing gaze shifted to the shadowy corners of the classroom as he spoke of a new player entering the deadly game unfolding in the aftermath of the Sukhara disaster. In the darkened alleys of Deep Space Nine, a ghost from Cardassia's past stirred, he intoned, his voice low and ominous. Elam Garrick, the exiled spy, the disgraced agent of the dreaded Obsidian Order. The students leaned forward, captivated by this twist in the tale. Garrick, Corvus revealed, had been watching the crisis from afar, his keen mind sifting through whispers and secrets. He saw a pattern in the chaos, a hidden hand pulling the strings, the old historian said. The sabotage of Sukhara was no mere accident, but the first move in a dangerous game. Garrick, driven by a fierce loyalty to Cardassia and a deep mistrust of the Federation, knew he had to act. Corvus painted a vivid picture of the wily spy slipping through the shadows, calling in old favors, hacking secure databases, piecing together a mosaic of truth from shards of rumor and hearsay. What Garrick uncovered chilled him to the bone, Corvus said gravely. Evidence of a vast conspiracy, a cancer eating at the heart of the fragile peace. A cabal of Cardassian hardliners, calling themselves the true way, plotting to plunge the quadrant back into war. Garrick, knowing he could trust no one else, reached out to the one man he believed could help. Dr. Julian Bashir, his old friend and sparring partner, now working with the Starfleet team investigating the Sukara incident. In clandestine meetings and coded messages, the two began to unravel the True Way's web of deceit, Corvus recounted. The picture that emerged was grim. The True Way, Corvus revealed, had wormed its way into the highest echelons of the Cardassian state. Gulls and legates, ministers and spy masters, all dancing to the tune of a fanatical few determined to see Cardassia rise again no matter the cost, he said, his words dripping with disdain. Garrick and Bashir, racing against time, unearthed the true scope of the threat. Secret shipyards churning out warships, hidden bases bristling with stolen weapons, legions of loyal soldiers ready to die for the cause. The True Way was preparing for war, Corvus said grimly. A war that would shatter the Federation and leave Cardassia triumphant among the ashes. But the True Way's greatest weapon, Corvus revealed, was not ships or soldiers, but lies. They whispered poison into the ears of the Cardassian people, he said, stoking the embers of old hatreds, promising glory and vengeance. A drumbeat of deception, urging the populace to rise up and cast off the shackles of the Federation. Garrick and Bashir, armed with the truth, raced to Deep Space Nine, to the office of Captain Garrett. There, with Louis Taylor at her side, they laid bare the True Way's plot, Corvus recounted. The evidence was damning, the implications dire. If the True Way succeeded, countless lives would be lost. Corvus let his words hang in the air, the students' eyes wide with anticipation. The fate of nations, of whole worlds, now rested on the actions of a few. The countdown to oblivion had begun, the old historian intoned. The only question was whether the forces of peace could triumph over the forces of war, whether the dream of unity could withstand the hammer blows of ancient hatreds. The classroom was silent, the weight of history pressing down like a physical force. Corvus, his voice low and steady, prepared to guide his students through the final acts of this great drama. The choices made in the coming days, he knew, would echo through the ages, shaping the future of the galaxy itself. Corvus's voice took on a grim urgency as he described the frantic efforts of Captain Garrett, Louis Taylor, and Commander Bauer to thwart the True Way's impending attack. With the intelligence provided by Garrick and Dr. Bashir, they knew they had precious little time to act. Garrett and Taylor wasted no time in assembling a joint task force of Starfleet and Cardassian personnel, Corvus recounted, his clawed fingers steepled. Every able-bodied soldier and officer was called upon, regardless of species or past allegiance. The fate of the quadrant hung in the balance. Surprisingly, one of the first to volunteer for the mission was none other than Gul Dukat himself. The former dictator, once the scourge of Bajor and a sworn enemy of the Federation, had been convinced by Garrick to renounce his old ways and aid the cause of peace. Many were skeptical of Dukat's sudden change of heart, Corvus admitted, but Garrett and Taylor, recognizing the value of his tactical knowledge and influence among the Cardassian military, welcomed him into the fold, a decision that would prove fateful in the battles to come. Under Garrett and Dukat's leadership, the task force launched a lightning campaign against the True Way, striking at their strongholds and weapons caches across Cardassian space. Corvus painted a vivid picture of the raids. Starfleet phasers and Cardassian disruptors lighting up the night, squads of troops in combat armor storming fortified bunkers, searing beams of energy crisscrossing the void of space as mighty warships clashed. For all their fanaticism, the True Way proved a slippery foe, Corvus growled. Always one step ahead, always ready with another trick or trap. Nowhere was this more evident than on that fateful moon in the Chintoka system. The old Cardassian's eyes seemed to stare into the past as he recalled the brutal battle that unfolded on that barren, windswept rock. Captain Garrett and her away team, caught in a savage ambush by a heavily armed True Way contingent, found themselves outgunned and pinned down, their numbers dwindling with each passing minute. Garrett's voice crackled across the comm, calling for reinforcements, Corvus said, his own voice heavy with the weight of memory. But with the task force fleet engaged in a pitched battle in orbit, there seemed little hope of salvation. Just when all seemed lost, a miracle appeared in the form of a squadron of Klingon warbirds, led by none other than Chancellor Martok himself. Corvus revealed how Taylor, foreseeing the need for additional support, had secretly reached out to the Klingon leader, calling upon the bonds of honor and blood forged in the Dominion War. With a roar that shook the very heavens, the Klingons fell upon the true way like a thunderbolt, Corvus recounted, his voice rising with the tale. Disruptor beams and photon torpedoes ripped through the enemy ranks, as Martok and his warriors beamed down to join the fray, batleths flashing in the smoke and fire. Bolstered by the Klingons' might and fury, Garrett and her team surged forward, beating back the True Way in a desperate, bloody push. In the heart of the enemy stronghold, they confronted the True Way's leader, a grizzled fanatic known only as the Raven. It was here, at the climax of the battle, that tragedy struck. As the Raven raised his weapon to cut down Garrett, Dukat leapt forward to shield her, taking the full force of the blast himself. The former dictator crumpled to the ground, mortally wounded, as Garrett dispatched the Raven with a single, furious phaser shot. As the last echoes of battle faded, Garrett cradled Dukat's broken form. Corvus said softly, his eyes distant. With his final breaths, the once-hated tyrant spoke of remorse, of regret for the path he had walked. He expressed his hope that, in some small way, his sacrifice might help to heal the wounds between their peoples, to light the way to a better future. The loss of Dukat, so soon after his redemption, was a heavy blow to the morale of the task force. But as Corvus observed, it also served to harden their resolve, to unite them in their determination to see the mission through, no matter the cost. As Garrett and her team beamed back to their ships, Dukat's body in tow, there was a new fire in their eyes, Corvus intoned, a grim sense of purpose, born of grief and righteous anger. The True Way had sown the wind, and now they would reap the whirlwind. With the intelligence gleaned from the raid, the noose began to tighten around the True Way's leadership. Corvus spoke of additional strikes, each more daring than the last, commander raids on hidden bases, lightning attacks on secret shipyards, decapitation strikes against key figures in the conspiracy. The True Way fought back with all the savagery of a cornered beast, Corvus growled. But with each blow, each loss, their strength waned and their cohesion crumbled. It was only a matter of time before the final blow was struck. As Corvus paused to gather his thoughts, his students leaned forward in their seats, sensing that the climax of the tale was fast approaching. The old historian's eyes gleamed with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The weight of a long-ago victory mingled with the pain of the sacrifices it had demanded. He took a deep breath, preparing to recount the final, fateful confrontation that would decide the future of the Alpha Quadrant. A confrontation that would test the mettle of the task force and the unbreakable will of Lewis Taylor himself. The stage was set for a reckoning, Corvus rumbled, his voice low and filled with the promise of revelation. And it would come on a world that had once been synonymous with betrayal and despair, a world called Cardassia Prime. Corvus leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he described the task force's final gambit to bring the True Way to justice. With Odo's intimate knowledge of the compound's layout and defenses, Captain Garrett and Lewis Taylor hatched a bold infiltration plan, the old historian growled, a plan that would put their lives and the lives of their team on the line. The students listened with rapt attention as Corvus detailed how Odo, using his unique shape-shifting abilities, disguised himself as a high-ranking True Way operative and slipped past the compound's formidable security measures. Once inside, the changeling moved swiftly and silently, his malleable form flowing through ventilation ducts and under doorways until he reached the central control room. With a few quick taps on the console, Odo disabled the compound's sensor arrays and lowered its shields, Corvus recounted, his clawed fingers miming the actions. And just like that, the impregnable fortress became vulnerable, its secrets laid bare. On Corvus's cue, the classroom lights dimmed and a holographic projection sprang to life, depicting the task force materializing within the compound in a shimmer of transporter energy. Captain Garrett and Louis Taylor were at the vanguard, their phasers drawn and their faces set with grim determination. The True Way defenders, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion, rallied quickly, Corvus narrated as the hologram showed Cardassian soldiers pouring into the corridors, disruptors blazing. But the task force was prepared, and they met the onslaught with a fury born of righteous conviction. The students watched, transfixed, as the holographic figures of Garrett and Taylor fought their way through the compound, their movements fluid and precise, their weapons spitting bolts of searing energy. Alongside them, Commander Bauer and Dr. Bashir darted from cover to cover, the former providing suppressing fire while the latter tended to the wounded. The battle was fierce and chaotic, Corvus said, his voice rising with the crescendo of simulated phaser fire. But the task force pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of the quadrant hung in the balance. Finally, the projection showed the team reaching the command center, the heavy blast doors shuddering under a barrage of phaser blasts before giving way. As the smoke cleared, the imposing figure of the executioner came into view, his face obscured by a dark hood and his hand clutching a dead man's switch. In that moment, the task force found themselves face to face with the architect of the True Way's reign of terror, Corvus said, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. And in his grasp, the means to plunge Cardassia, and potentially the entire quadrant, into the fires of war. The executioner's voice, distorted and menacing, filled the classroom as he issued his ultimatum. One false move, one hint of defiance, and I will unleash the hell of 1,000 suns upon your precious allies, he sneered. The choice is yours, but know that the True Way will never surrender. Corvus let the weight of the moment hang in the air, the students' eyes fixed on the frozen tableau of the task force and their adversary, locked in a tense standoff. The fate of millions, the future of the Alpha Quadrant itself, would be decided in the next few critical moments. And that, my students, Corvus rumbled, is where the true test of our heroes' resolve began. For in the face of annihilation, in the clutches of a madman's schemes, they would have to find a way to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and the cost of failure was too terrible to contemplate. The old historian settled back in his chair, his gaze distant and haunted. The story was nearing its climax, but the ultimate outcome was still shrouded in shadows. The students leaned forward, their hearts pounding, desperate to know how this critical moment in history would unfold. But the task force refused to yield, Corvus continued, his voice low and intense. For they knew that to give in to the executioner's demands would be to betray everything they had fought for, to condemn the quadrant to a future of tyranny and fear. The old Cardassian's eyes glinted with a mix of pride and sorrow as he prepared to recount the final, fateful moments of the confrontation that would shape the course of galactic history. In the heart of the True Way compound, the standoff between the Starfleet Cardassian task force and the terrorist leader known as the Executioner had reached a critical juncture. Captain Garrett and Louis Taylor, their weapons trained on the hooded figure, watched in tense silence as his finger hovered over the dead man's switch, a single twitch away from unleashing devastation across Cardassian space. "You've lost, Executioner," Taylor growled, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "It's over. Drop the switch and surrender peacefully." The Executioner's laughter, cold and mirthless, echoed through the command center. "You still don't understand, do you?" he sneered. "The True Way cannot be stopped. We are the future of Cardassia, and we will not rest until—" His words were cut short by a sudden deafening explosion that rocked the compound to its foundations. The task force, momentarily stunned, could only watch as a section of the command center wall buckled and collapsed, sending debris and clouds of choking dust billowing through the room. In the confusion, a lone figure emerged from the smoke, a familiar gray-scaled face streaked with blood and grime. Garrick, the exiled Cardassian spy, stood tall and defiant, a stolen disruptor rifle clutched in his hands. Executioner! Garrick's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. Your reign of terror ends here. In a blur of motion almost too fast to follow, Garrick raised his weapon and fired, a searing bolt of energy lancing across the room. The disruptor beam struck the executioner's hand with surgical precision, vaporizing flesh and metal alike. The dead man's switch clattered to the floor, rendered harmless in an instant. The executioner's howl of pain and rage was drowned out by the sudden surge of phaser fire as the task force leapt into action. Garrett and Taylor led the charge, barking orders as they moved to secure the command center and neutralize the remaining True-Way operatives. In the midst of the firefight, Garrick staggered, his strength ebbing as the toll of his injuries finally caught up with him. As he slumped to the ground, Dr. Bashir rushed to his side, his medical tricorder already whirring. Stay with me, Garrick, Bashir urged, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he applied pressure to the spy's wounds. We'll have you patched up in no time. Garrick managed a weak chuckle, his blue eyes glinting with a familiar mischief despite the pain. Really, Doctor, he rasped. I had no idea you cared. With the True-Way's leadership in custody and their command structure in disarray, the task force wasted no time in pressing their advantage. As Garrick was rushed to the USS Excalibur's sickbay, Garrett and Taylor set about the task of interrogating their prisoners, determined to extract every scrap of intelligence they could. In the ship's dimly lit brig, the once proud executioner sat slumped and defeated, his face a mask of impotent rage as Taylor and Bauer grilled him mercilessly. Names, locations, plans, every detail of the True-Way's network was laid bare under the relentless onslaught of questions. Elsewhere on the Excalibur, Dr. Bashir and a team of Starfleet technicians pored over the treasure trove of data recovered from the True-Way's computer systems. Encrypted files were cracked, deleted records restored, hidden transmissions unscrambled. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge of the True-Way's vast web of agents, sympathizers, and secret backers. As Corvus reflected on this pivotal moment, a note of grim satisfaction crept into his voice. The True-Way, once thought an unstoppable force, had been dealt a blow from which it would not soon recover. The dream of a new Cardassian empire, built on the ashes of the Federation, had been shattered beyond repair. But even as the task force savored its hard-won victory, a sense of unease lingered. The road ahead, as Corvus had warned, would be far from smooth. The scars of the past ran deep, and the forces of chaos and discord were never far from the surface. On the Excalibur's bridge, Captain Garrett and Lewis Taylor stood side by side, their faces lined with a mix of exhaustion and grim resolve. They had won the battle, but the war for lasting peace was far from over. As the great ship set course for Deep Space Nine, its crew steeled themselves for the challenges to come, knowing that the fate of the quadrant would rest on the choices they made in the days ahead. Corvus shifts his focus to the aftermath of the True-Way's defeat, his gravelly voice tinged with a mix of relief and weariness. With the immediate threat neutralized, the Federation and its allies turned to the difficult task of rebuilding, he intones, his gaze distant as if picturing the war-torn streets of Cardassia Prime. He describes how a new Cardassian government, led by a coalition of reformers and moderates, rose from the ashes of the conflict. These leaders, chastened by the horrors of war and the folly of their predecessors' ambitions, sought to steer Cardassia towards a more peaceful and democratic future, Corvus explains. A future in which cooperation, not conquest, would be the guiding principle. The old historian recounts how the Federation, embodied by the tireless efforts of Lewis Taylor and his fellow diplomats, worked hand in hand with the fledgling Cardassian government. Aid flowed from Earth and a dozen other worlds, Corvus says, food and medicine for the hungry and sick, technology and expertise to rebuild shattered infrastructure. But even as the physical wounds began to heal, Corvus notes that the scars on the Cardassian psyche remained raw. Generations had been raised on dreams of empire and glory, he rasps. For many, the humiliation of defeat and the yoke of Federation oversight were bitter pills to swallow. To address these lingering tensions and prevent the rise of new terrorist threats, Corvus reveals that a bold initiative was launched: the creation of the Cardassian Federation Security Alliance, a joint peacekeeping force comprised of both Starfleet and Cardassian personnel. Leading this force was none other than Jack Bauer, the indomitable commander who had proven his mettle during the raid on the Trueway compound, Corvus says, a note of admiration creeping into his voice. Promoted to the rank of captain, Bauer set about forging the CFSA into an effective and respected guardian of the new order. Under Bauer's firm hand, Corvus describes how the CFSA moved swiftly to secure key installations and population centers, their presence a visible reminder of the Federation's commitment to Cardassia's stability. Mixed patrols of humans and Cardassians walked the streets, he recounts, their shared uniforms a symbol of the new spirit of unity and common purpose. But even as this new security architecture took shape, Corvus notes that the scientific community was not idle. He speaks of a research team, assembled in the wake of the Sukara disaster, tasked with unraveling the mysteries of the deadly crystalline technology. Led by the brilliant Dr. Bashir and a prodigious young Cardassian scientist named Lenak Parks, this team labored tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the crystals, Corvus says, his voice swelling with the thrill of discovery. Toiling in cutting-edge labs and poring over reams of data, they sought to tame the awesome power that had once brought the quadrant to the brink of annihilation. Slowly but surely, Corvus reveals, Bashir and Parks made groundbreaking strides. They developed new methods of containment and control, he explains, harnessing the crystal's vast energies for constructive ends. In their hands, what had been an instrument of death was transformed into a tool of creation, with applications in fields as diverse as medicine, energy production, and even terraforming. As he begins to wind down his tale, Corvus steps back to reflect on the broader lessons of the conflict. The road to lasting peace is seldom smooth, he intones, his gaze sweeping over his enraptured students. It is a path fraught with setbacks and challenges, demanding constant vigilance and unwavering commitment from all who walk it. But in the end, Corvus suggests, the struggle is worth the cost. For it is in the crucible of shared adversity that the strongest bonds are forged. He rasps, bonds between individuals, between peoples, between worlds. Bonds that have the power to transform ancient enmities into newfound understanding and to light the way to a brighter tomorrow for all. The old historian leans back in his chair, his tale not yet finished but paused for a moment of reflection. In the faces of his students, he sees the flickering embers of hope and determination, the promise of a new generation ready to take up the mantle of peace. And in that moment, despite the weight of the years and the scars of the past, Corvus allows himself a small, grim smile. The future, he knows, is still being written. Corvus pauses for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over the classroom like a heavy mantle. His eyes, ancient and knowing, sweep over the faces of his students, gauging their reactions to the tumultuous history he has just recounted. But even in the darkest of times, he rumbles, his voice a low, gravelly timbre, there are moments of light, moments that remind us of the indomitable spirit of unity and cooperation that binds the galaxy together. The old historian leans forward, his gnarled fingers steepled before him. One such moment, he says, came 5 years after the defeat of the Trueway, with the signing of the historic Treaty of Unity. Corvus's voice takes on a note of reverence as he describes the tireless diplomatic efforts of Lewis Taylor, Captain Garrett, and other Federation leaders. For months, they worked to forge a new era of partnership between the Cardassian Union and the United Federation of Planets, he says, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to a better future. The scene shifts to the newly rebuilt Sukara Station, a gleaming beacon of progress rising from the ashes of conflict. Dignitaries from across the quadrant fill the station's grand atrium, a sea of diverse faces and colorful attire. Chancellor Martok of the Klingon Empire stands tall and proud, his battle-scarred visage a testament to the warrior spirit of his people. Beside him, Castellan Rakana Garan of the Cardassian Union cuts a regal figure, her posture poised and her eyes sharp with intelligence. At the center of the gathering, a simple table stands, its surface adorned with a single document, the Treaty of Unity. Louis Taylor and Captain Garrett flank the table, their faces lined with the weight of the moment. As the assembled dignitaries look on, Dr. Linak Parks steps forward, a small, crystalline sculpture cradled in his hands. Parks, who has become a symbol of the new spirit of scientific cooperation between the Cardassian and Federation peoples, speaks in a clear, ringing voice. This sculpture, he says, holding the glittering object aloft, was created using the very technology that once nearly tore us apart. But today, it stands as a symbol of the incredible potential of that technology, not just for scientific advancement, but for building bridges of understanding between our cultures and our species. As Parks unveils the sculpture, a hush falls over the atrium. The crystalline form seems to pulse with an inner light, its facets casting shimmering reflections across the faces of the gathered dignitaries. "Let this sculpture be a permanent reminder," Parks declares, "of the bonds forged between the Cardassian and Federation peoples. A reminder of the power of unity in the face of adversity and the strength that comes from embracing our differences." With a solemn nod, Louis Taylor and Castellan Garan step forward, each taking hold of a stylus. In a moment heavy with symbolism, they affix their signatures to the Treaty of Unity, officially cementing the new era of cooperation between their two great powers. As applause rings out across the atrium, Corvus leans back in his chair, his eyes distant with memory. The Treaty of Unity did not end all tensions between the Cardassian Union and the Federation, he admits, but it marked a significant step forward in their relationship, paving the way for greater collaboration in trade, diplomacy, scientific research, and cultural exchange. The old historian's gaze sweeps over his students once more, his voice ringing with conviction. "It was a powerful symbol," he says, "of the resilience and adaptability of both societies, and their commitment to building a better future together. A future where the bonds of unity and understanding would forever outweigh the forces of division and strife." As Corvus nears the end of his lecture, his voice grows heavy with the weight of history's tragic twists. "But even as the Treaty of Unity promised a new dawn of peace," he intones, "the forces of chaos and vengeance conspired to shatter that fragile balance." The old historian's eyes darken as he recounts the fateful day when a rogue faction of the Cardassian military, led by the embittered Commander Damar, launched a devastating surprise attack on a Federation starbase near the Cardassian border. The base's defenses, caught completely unprepared, crumpled under the onslaught of Cardassian weapons fire. "The attack was swift, brutal, and merciless," Corvus rasps, his voice thick with sorrow. "Hundreds of Starfleet personnel, including many of the Federation's brightest and most promising officers, were cut down in a matter of minutes." But the greatest blow, Corvus reveals, was yet to come. Among the casualties of the attack was none other than Louis Taylor himself, the legendary hero of the Cardassian conflict, who had been visiting the starbase on a diplomatic mission of peace. Taylor's death sent shockwaves rippling across the quadrant, Corvus says, his voice heavy with the weight of the loss. For so many, he had been a symbol of hope, a living embodiment of the idea that even the most bitter of enemies could find common ground. With his loss, that hope seemed to die as well. In the attack's aftermath, the Federation reeled, struggling to comprehend the scale of the betrayal. Outrage and calls for retribution swept across the member worlds as a grief-stricken populace demanded justice for the fallen. The Cardassian government, still fragile in the aftermath of the True Way's defeat, found itself in turmoil. Torn between the need to bring the rogue faction to heel and the fear of igniting a full-scale revolt, the leadership seemed paralyzed, unable to act decisively. It was a moment of crisis, a tipping point that threatened to plunge the quadrant back into the abyss of war, Corvus says gravely. A moment that called for heroes to step forward and fight for the future they had bled to build. Enter Captain Garrett and her intrepid crew, who took it upon themselves to bring Damar and his cohorts to justice. Joining forces with a hand-picked team of Cardassian operatives led by none other than Garrick himself, they set out on a daring mission to infiltrate the heart of Cardassian space and root out the insurgents. It was a mission fraught with peril, a desperate gamble taken in the name of peace, Corvus recounts, his voice taut with tension. Failure would mean not just their own deaths, but potentially the unraveling of everything they had fought so hard to achieve. In a hidden base deep within Cardassian territory, Garrett and her team finally confronted Damar and his followers. The battle was fierce and bloody, a close-quarters melee of phaser fire and desperate hand-to-hand combat. Though outnumbered and outgunned, Garrett and her people fought with the courage of lions, Corvus says, his voice swelling with pride. They pushed forward, inch by hard-won inch, driven by the knowledge that the fate of millions hung in the balance. In the end, the Federation Cardassian team prevailed, capturing Damar and his lieutenants and dealing a crushing blow to the insurgency. But the victory, Corvus reveals, came at a terrible cost. Several of Garrett's crew, including her beloved first officer, fell in the final assault, their lives given in defense of the greater good. And Garrick, the enigmatic Cardassian who had risked everything to forge a new path for his people, was gravely wounded, his fate uncertain. As Garrett and her battered team emerged from that charnel house, the taste of victory was ashes in their mouths, Corvus says solemnly. For though they had achieved their mission, the price paid in blood and tears had been beyond reckoning.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.